Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We'll be starting in just 1 minute. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and get started here. This is Jennifer Romano Bergstrom, the president of UXPA International, and I'm very excited to have Cory Lebson with us today speaking about UX careers. Before we begin, before I turn it over to Cory, I just wanted to say a couple things about UXPA. For those of you who are not already familiar with UXPA, we are the User Experience Professionals Association. And we're the international organization. There's a lot of chapters all over the world, but this group that I'm a part of is the international organization. And we have a number of goals. Our main goal is really to bring more UX resources to UX professionals. So things like this webinar series. We have these every single month, and this year we've started bringing Spanish webinars to our members and to UX professionals as well. So stay in touch on our website to stay up to date on upcoming webinars. You can also sign up for our newsletter to stay in touch. We also have our User Experience magazine and the Journal of Usability Studies. These are both really great publications that we aim to have really quality publications for UX professionals. So be sure to check those out. And then, of course, we have our main event, our annual conference. This year it's taking place in Toronto, June 5th through the 8th. Registration is open. And you can check out uxpa2017.org for more information about that. So now, without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Cory. As I said, I'm really excited to have Cory speaking with us today. Cory is a user experience consultant in the Washington, D.C. area, and he is the principal and owner of Lebson Tech. Lebson Tech focuses on user research and evaluation and user experience strategy and UX training and mentoring. And Cory has many, many years of experience, so he's highly qualified to be talking to us today about UX career development. He has a recent book that just came out, the UX Careers Handbook, so he'll be sharing some information about that book with us all here. And of course, I have to mention that Cory is actually the past president of the UXPA International, as well as past president of the UXPA DC chapter. So it's quite an honor to bring Cory to you all today. So without further ado, oh wait, before I turn it over, sorry, just really quick, just some kind of housekeeping. If you have any questions, please use the GoToWebinar panel on the right-hand side of the screen. At the end of Cory's talk, I'll be fielding questions. We'll have Q&A at the end. All right, thank you so much. Cory, over to you.
Great, thanks, Jen. Well, it's great to be here today. I've had the opportunity to speak about the UX Careers Handbook a number of times in person, and this is actually the first time I'm doing a webinar about the book. So, it's certainly good to be here. Now, before I talk more about the book, however, I do want to give a number of acknowledgments. I mean, basically, there were so many people who helped with this book, who wrote stories, anecdotes, and contributed. That, I mean, really, it's it's my book, but it's also everyone else's book as well. So thank you to everyone who did contribute. Now, The first thing that you'll notice about the book is that there's a big cheesecake on the cover. Now, I don't think that at any other point does any other UX book have food on the cover. There's certainly there's some animals, there's some self-portraits, but not food. So I will admit that as I was writing the book, all along I had this vision that there would be an umbrella on the cover. Why? Because UX is kind of that umbrella career. We'll talk about that in a bit. But then, a little before everything was finalized, I'd finished the draft, I'd finished the text, and everything was finalized. And then the publisher said, you know what, an umbrella, it's a little bit too dreary. It doesn't quite do it for us. Can you come up with another idea? So I looked and I thought and kind of saw what was available. And finally, I proposed to the publisher, hey, why don't we do cheesecake on the cover? And sure, it's bright, it's cheerful, maybe that attracts attention and people think they're buying a cookbook, so I get some extra sales. But really, I made the case to the publisher and I actually wrote a blog post about it, just as this was, as the cover itself was becoming available. That UX is really a lot like this picture of cheesecake. I mean, clearly there's a lot of cheesecake. There's a whole cheesecake there, but different assorted varieties. So why is it? Why is it cheesecake? Well, as you look at the cheesecake, and you can certainly look at the blog. It's on my website. It's also on my LinkedIn Pulse profile. So well, UX is a whole variety of different careers, right? It's a whole variety of different careers, but it's all UX. It's all part of this, well, what I would say the umbrella of UX, but it's all connected. It's all cheesecake. Cheesecake is also international. Many countries have a derivation. This picture here is the American style of cheesecake for the most part, but different countries have cheesecake, but the cheese is different. The crust is different. The fillings are different, or the different kinds of toppings on it are different. But it's still the same kind of thing. The same dairy cake made of cheese of some kind. And UX is very international. And it's the same careers, in fact, that are all over the world, or at least very similar. And there's chocolate that threads its way through each of these pieces of cheesecake. And similarly, there's a lot of skills, a lot of similarities that thread their way through a number of the different pathways that the book talks about, that we'll talk about as a UX career. So ultimately, there's a number of reasons in the blog post, but cheesecake just seemed good. Since then, actually, I've gotten a lot of both amusement. Wow, there's cheesecake on the cover, and oh yeah, I get it. That makes sense. So happy to have the cheesecake here. But ultimately, part of the UX story is that user experience is a melting pot. Really, Nick Gould, then he was Chief Operating Officer at Cooper, now he has a new role, wrote a story about how he started out as a lawyer, and gradually over time, he realized that UX was what he wanted to do, and he made a career of it. Similarly, the illustration on the right is one of the illustrations in the book that talks about basically, any field that you start in, there's some pathway to UX. You can start anywhere. You can have confidence that wherever you're starting, should you have the interest and the inclination and the desire to learn, you can really build this user experience career from anything. So. Certainly, UX is great. It's great to say I want to do UX. It's great to get started, to say I'm going to start in UX. But it is really important to understand the UX career framework. This will come up, throughout the process of learning UX, throughout the process of getting a job, throughout the process of having a job. You've got to understand kind of how UX as this umbrella is in fact structured. So, in short, UX involves three primary things. It involves designing stuff, it involves evaluating stuff, and it involves strategizing about stuff. Now, as you design stuff in UX, you're still going to be evaluating and strategizing. As you evaluate, you're still going to be designing and strategizing, and as you strategize, you're going to be designing and evaluating. So it's not pure. It's not I only do design, or I only do evaluation, or I only do strategy. It's that I primarily do design, or I primarily evaluate, or I primarily make strategic decisions. But again, nothing is pure. So this is the UX career umbrella, as I would define it. And let's talk about each of these careers here in the umbrella. Okay, so we've got careers that I've classified as primarily design, careers that are primarily evaluation, and careers that are primarily strategy. Again, knowing that nothing is pure. So interaction design, sometimes synonymously called UX design, is largely concerned with the interaction that a user has with an interface, with elements on the interface, between pages, between screens of the interface. It's not about the beauty. Specifically, it's really about coming up with something that users understand and can properly interact with. Okay, then there's information architecture. Information architecture is primarily focused on organizing and designing the information. That's both the information kind of visibly, perhaps in menus, in links on a website, but also in things that go on behind the scenes: the taxonomy, the metadata, the classification, the different tags that things have. That's all part of information architecture. I will say information architecture and interaction design are both sometimes used as the umbrella. While by and large, and today we largely think about UX as kind of the umbrella, other umbrellas have been proposed, have come up from time to time. So you could see a position that is called interaction design, or a position that is called information architecture, but in fact could mean other things here as well. Certainly, as someone's lens may have been in that differing perspective. Then we have visual design. Now, visual design is much more focused on the artistry, on the beauty of something, but not for beauty itself. Again, it comes back to the user. It's about really making sure that the design is appropriate for the user, that the colors are appropriate, that the fonts are appropriate, that the white space is appropriate, and overall that the design is attractive, but it's also usable. Now, working on content, maybe web writing, something like information design, we're really focused on the stuff that goes into the interface. Largely, we're talking about words, but we can also talk about illustrations or pictures that go along with it. It's about designing the words and the information in a way that people can understand. Okay. Then the last two, we have service design. Service design actually is not all that popular to have at least service design careers in here where I'm in the United States, but in Europe it's a bit more popular. But service design is really focused on the entirety of the customer's experience with the company, be it walking into a storefront, dealing with the online interface, calling for some help. Using a web chat, and it's the entirety of that experience that a customer has with a company. And finally, we have technical communication. Technical communication is really focused on taking complex information and making it understandable to users, whether through just-in-time help, user guides, and so on. But again, it's all about designing for the user, designing that makes sense. Now, our evaluation bucket here has user research. User research is something probably the most near and dear to my heart. What I've been doing for over 20 years now is new things like different kinds of activities where we want to make sure that, okay, we think we designed for the user, but did we really? Did we make sure that what we designed is in fact what is in fact what users understand and what users can use. So user research, and typical user research would be, say, or a project could be a usability test. That's often most stereotypically user research, as well as a focus group focused on, again, the usage of the product, or a user interview, or ethnography. Or even a card sort, which kind of gets to the organization of information, more that information architecture or IA perspective. I will say accessibility is also something that I've been very involved in, since probably about 2002. And for accessibility, basically we want to make sure that all users can use our product. We call this sometimes universal usability. And that's regardless of whether there are any limitations in what a user can hear, what a user can see, or what a user can do, physically with a mouse and keyboard, or some alternative technology. And then we have human factors, which is largely focused on things like ergonomics and doing research, but often the research is focused on physical products where you want to see, for example, if a switch can be reached or a control can be reached and reached comfortably. We think of things like cockpit design. We think of automotive design. Those things often fall into the realm of human factors. And then finally, our last bucket is strategy. We've got UX strategy, really focused on how UX is aligned with key business decisions, making sure that a business is properly designing what users want for business success. We also have content strategy, making sure that there's the consistent tone and voice throughout the organization. Even when you have multiple people designing content, they're designing content in a way that seamlessly appears throughout everything that an organization produces, and again is most usable for that in that way. And then we have customer experience, with things like voice of the customer, and we can do quantitative research, quantitative research that then informs the kind of the strategic vision of how a company relates to their customers. And then, I have a development over here, kind of sitting off on its own. And often I hear, well, development is part of the UX career umbrella. It's part of this framework. My take would be, and certainly there's different opinions here, that the development itself is not UX. If you're developing the user interface, that's not part of user experience, because by that point, by the time the development is happening, all the specs have been created. The designs, the wireframes, the design comps, and so on have been are already there, and development is the implementation of the user experience. And that said, certainly there are other definitions along those lines, but basically what I would say to people who are doing development is that you can incorporate user experience principles into what you develop, and simultaneously a developer can also be doing interaction design or any other kind of design as well, just that it's kind of more of a separate one person doing two different elements, two different skill sets, one of which is more UX centric. So inevitably, there's that question, should a user experience professional do it all? Does it make sense that that one person, we've got all these wonderful, great skills here, so should you learn everything? Should you learn many of these so that you can successfully compete in the job market? This is an illustration from the book, but basically, my perspective would be that you want to learn about the UX pie. You want to understand all those things that we just talked about. But then you've got to pick your slice, okay? You've got to pick that thing or those things that are most interesting to you, that resonate most with you, that you find most intriguing. Okay. So Baruch Sachs, who runs UX practice at a consultancy, wrote a piece about why it's good to be an octopus and not a unicorn. Often we hear the term UX unicorn, meaning that UX professional who can really do it all, and it's all wonderful. It's great. By doing it all, then you can get a job anywhere doing anything. But the problem is that it's not possible, really, to be an expert in everything. And you'll grow professionally by becoming an expert, by gaining this expertise in at least one or two areas. And then for employers, they can think, okay, you know what, I'll find someone who has these skills already, but I really need these other skills as well. That's okay, because as long as the person has the inclination and the ability, but primarily the interest, they can learn and they can grow and can become that octopus. They can squeeze into every kind of UX that the employer wants, as long as they can learn on the job specific to the employer's needs. But certainly, that said, while I'd encourage you not to try to be a unicorn, it is important to understand that big UX picture, to understand what UX is about at the macro level. And if you did have a job as, say, a UX leader managing UX teams, then by all means, you do need to at least have a high-level understanding of what each team member does. But simultaneously, even if you're a practitioner in some specific aspect of UX, then you need to understand what the different roles are, what your role is, and how your role fits into that big picture. And certainly, I'd encourage you to really kind of branch out as your career progresses. Okay. So and part of that branching out is that you really never should stop learning. UX itself is a field where the methods are always being tweaked, the methods are always being adapted over time, and not only is it the case where you need to kind of stay on top of the latest UX trends and methods, but the technology is changing as well. So you need to be able to grow your UX skills, but you also need to grow your UX skills within a changing landscape. Where today it might be a desktop or a laptop computer. Tomorrow it's a mobile device. The next day it's wearables. Wearables now you can have a usability test in the interface the same way you could have a usability test anywhere else. And then just yesterday, Elon Musk offered up that he's starting a company where we're going to have direct brain interfaces, and I really wonder what that's going to do to UX skills, and how we're going to have usability testing of a brain, and much less a design of a brain interface. Okay. So Dan Brown, who runs a UX company, he writes a piece about why you need to find an employer that encourages learning. It's all fine and good to say, well, I want to learn, but if you can't learn on the clock sometimes, you're going to have less opportunities to learn, you're going to have less time, and you're going to have less ability to grow your skills. So you need to find an employer who does facilitate the learning process. But you also, whoever your current employer is, you need to go to them and say, hey, this conference intrigues me. This book, this looks like a great book. Will you buy it for the corporate library and let me read it? So find that employer that lets you grow your skills on company time and with company dollars. So so as a good UX professional, you should also learn to tell your story, right? Because UX is really all about storytelling. I mean, that is that's what we're about. We tell stories to explain how the users can use a system, and then we design those, and then we research them, and then we strategize about them. But it all starts with that story. So similar to that, again, another illustration from the book. You need to tell your UX story through your portfolio. Now your portfolio is going to be those things that you've created, and those things that you created, perhaps as part of your learning process, as well as on the job. But it's really all about the narrative that goes along with it. So it's fine to say, hey, here's deliverables, here's anonymized deliverables, or sample deliverables, or things I've done in class, and so on. But your story needs to say, one, I did this. This is my role. It was a team project. I did this, and I'm a team player, and did it as part of the team. And two, here's the flow. I did this, and then I did this, and then I did this, and why? Why did I do all this? So, your narrative becomes almost a sample of what you can do with your story, right? You as the person, and this is critically important, and something that you should review that portfolio, and say, hey, did I properly tell my story? And my resume is going to just be a narrative. It's going to be a couple, a series of bullet points divided by subsections, that can be skimmable, that can be readable and make sense. And again, tells the story of a career progression and how you continue to grow your UX skills and use those UX skills. So the story does have to fit an understandable framework. We have, for example, interaction design, we have user research, two of the most common UX fields. And if someone says, well, I do interaction design, I do user research, and here's the skills that I use as interaction design, and here's the skills that I use for user research, and this is how I fit into the puzzle of that UX career framework that we talked about earlier, that makes sense. If you say, but conversely, if you say, oh, well, I've got a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and it doesn't cohesively fit into that framework that we talked about, just kind of a collection of skills, it weakens the story. It doesn't kind of say, okay, now this makes sense. I'm looking for this kind of person, and you, the job seeker, have a lot of what I'm looking for. Okay. So you also need to kind of, when you come up with your story for who you are, for what you do with your resume and portfolio, ultimately you're going to look for a job. When you look for a job, the story needs to, at least to some degree, match the job description. The story that you put out there needs to match the request of the company. Now, sometimes there could be great alignment where you look at the job and say, wow, the skills that they're asking for are exactly what I have. And that's wonderful. It's wonderful. It's great to have that alignment, and by all means, you'd want to apply for that job. Other times, you'd see good alignment. They've got much of your story, much of what much of what you say that you're good at, what you enjoy doing, but not everything. And that's okay. And that kind of job is still certainly available to apply for. Or you should certainly feel free to apply, and then say, you know what, I'm weaker here, but I want to learn. I'm interested, and hire me, and I'll continue to grow in the right way. I'll be that octopus that we talked about. So sometimes you'll find poor alignment, however. When the alignment is poor, it could be one of two reasons. One, it's a good job description, and you just don't fit. So while you could apply, particularly if they're looking for someone who's really kind of novice in their career, just starting in UX, and you say, well, I'm very interested. You don't need expertise anywhere, so I've got some base, and maybe that's good enough. Other times, so I'd say apply with some caution, understanding that the alignment's pretty poor, so you have to make the case of why they should hire you anyway. But other times, though, you'll find a poor job description there where really they say, well, we want a little bit of this, a little bit of that, we want that unicorn. And I would generally steer clear of those jobs, because if that's what they're looking for, and short of saying we want a kind of an intern or somebody to try different things, really if they're looking for multiple or many levels of expertise, they may not fully understand that that's not really possible, or at least very, very rare, and not something that, not a place you necessarily want to be. really a good job description aligns with a candidate. I mean, a good candidate is one that aligns with that job description. They they um, they work with each other, and that's where what you should strive to look for, either with the great alignment or possibly the good alignment. Okay. So, you definitely need to keep your story fresh and maintain your brand. Why? Because your story is more than just your resume and your portfolio. Um, it's actually how you can be found online. So just remember that you are kind of broadcasting all the time online. This is who I am, and if you're not even findable online, then that could work against you when potential employers look you up and say, okay, we want to see who this person is. Are they really embedded in UX? Do they really have the job skills? One thing that your online brand needs to reflect is an internal coherence. That is, you need to make it very clear that that when people find you in one place and you in the other place, it's the same you. Sure, you can have personal interests, and then by all means, everyone has personal interests. But by and large, when they Google you or they look you up online, they need to say, okay, yeah, this is the same person who appears consistently as I look them up, as I understand their brand. But of course, external consistency too. I mean, that is, I understand user research as a field. I understand interaction design as a field, and that's how this person fits within user research, fits within interaction design, does not fit in visual design. Okay, so those are the kinds of jobs that I probably want to hire a person for when they match these well-defined kind of externally roles. Okay. You can also use social media to promote your brand. I advocate on Twitter, for example, for the UX hashtag. Most of my tweets use the UX hashtag, and by definition, are related to user experience. Why? Because people search for the UX hashtag. Also, when people find you online, they're often going to see your tweets. If you do tweet, and if you don't, then consider it. But if you're tweeting interesting ideas, places you go that are related to UX, and interesting UX blogs that you read, your own UX content and ideas, they'll start to see, yeah, this person lives and breathes user experience. This then becomes your brand. And simultaneously with something like LinkedIn, personal SEO matters. Not only with LinkedIn, but the truth is also with your own website, with your own blog. I have my own blog on WordPress in addition to LinkedIn Pulse. But basically, if people look you up with your LinkedIn profile, if people look you up, using certain keywords, you want to make sure that those keywords are properly and appropriately used in a way that that means that they'll find you when they need to find you, when you're the right person for the job because you have those skills. Your brand is also tied to your network and to who you know. So who you're connected with on LinkedIn, who you follow and who follows you on Twitter, and also your in-person network. So by all means, wherever you are, if you're in a major metropolitan area in a big city, there's apt to be UX meetups. But even in smaller cities, even in places where there's less UX work around, or less UX people, less UX work, you're still apt to find some UX organization or even UX-related organization where you can meet people, where you can network, where you can build your real-life network. And of course, Jen was saying at the very beginning, there's the UXPA conference, which I'll be at, and with international conferences, international and national conferences wherever you are, you can also kind of build those connections nationally and globally. And by all means, everyone should practice their elevator pitch. By elevator pitch, I mean maybe say 30 seconds where you say, this is who I am, this is why I'm awesome, and this is this is why this is why I'm someone you should get to know. If you're talking to an employer, this is someone you should hire. And for employers, they should be practicing their elevator pitch too, and say, hey, this is why you should work for us. But basically, practice your elevator pitch at home, practice your elevator pitch in front of the mirror, make it your own, and then you can smoothly, kind of without sounding arrogant or conversely sounding insecure, you can say, this is why I'm an awesome UX professional. Okay. So this part came after the book was written. I co-wrote an article about Till Retirement Do Us Part, basically saying that nothing lasts forever. Ultimately, no UX job is going to last probably for the lifetime of your career. So focus on building out this network now. Focus, even if you say, hey, I'm not looking for a job, just remember that because nothing lasts forever, you really should be preparing all the time, even as you're not looking. So when you're ready to really look, that you should certainly tell your network you're looking in, you're in person, your friends, your family that you're looking, as much as you can, and post your job search on social media if you can. Obviously, there are certain limitations where you aren't ready to tell your employer. You can go to UX events, you can check out online job boards, and you can even create your own custom job board feed. I use Feedly, and even though I'm not looking for a job and I'm happy in my freelance role, I still like to see what jobs are out there and kind of the changes in the employment landscape, particularly where I live in the DC area. So I use sort of the different the job aggregators like Indeed, for example, create a bunch of RSS feeds, put them into Feedly, and I constantly see in my area, what the trends are in the local job market. Okay. Oops. So you also need to prepare your cover letter, whatever that means. Because obviously we don't necessarily write this letter, stick in the postal mail and send it. But often, certainly there's a little blurb that you'll put with when you send a resume, a portfolio online, or through email, or a link to a portfolio resume rather. But this is where you customize things, and you say, hey. Hey, here's the story I tell to everyone, but here's how my story specifically applies to you. Obviously, you need to do your research first to make sure you accurately portray how it does apply. And then I encourage you to follow up over 2 channels, because no electronic means can be fully relied upon these days, unfortunately. So if you send a note through social media, maybe then you send a note by email, or by email and by phone. Just 2 channels. If it doesn't work out, then move on and look at other job prospects. Okay. When it's time for an interview, certainly do your research again. Look up whomever you can on LinkedIn, on social media, and on the web, so that you understand, so that you can ask the right questions. When you go into a job interview, certainly look the part by kind of understanding what the dress is, what the appropriate dress code is for any given organization, because these days they vary tremendously. And just always keep in your mind, I've got to tell my story. And if they want you to demonstrate your skills, be prepared to do that too, and see if you can find out in advance if they're going to want that. But even if not, be ready to jump on it and share those skills. Okay. And certainly assess in advance what you want, but kind of keep particularly with a salary, with benefits, which obviously are going to differ regionally as well, with the lifestyle you want, with the job title you want. But just wait until it's the right time. Don't rush to negotiate immediately. Just kind of hold on a little bit. And be aware of your body language, because your body language is something that you can modulate, that you can take control of, but it's going to take some practice first. Imagine yourself doing that interview in front of a mirror, and see what you do. How do you lean back? Do you lean forward? Do you clasp your hands together? And try to figure out, how am I going to just look confident, but not overconfident? How will things look just right? Okay. I'd encourage you also to be a leader. To be a leader in a number of ways. One, you can be a leader at your company, and that doesn't necessarily mean you have the job title of leader, but you're always going to be improving yourself. You're going to be working with others, and you're going to be kind of a person that others will want to follow. You can also help others. You can also help others explicitly as advisors to other employees who may not have the skills that you do. Mentoring people, and of course being that role model. But do remember that you can be a leader at work no matter what, with or without the job title. I really very much have enjoyed being a kind of volunteer and leader of the UX community. As Jen was saying initially, in the DC area and for UXP International, basically because then you're making a commitment to help others with their careers, and it feels really good. And also, it's a good it's a good part of the story. It says, okay, I'm a UX professional and I do UX work, and I'm embedded in the UX community in this way that really helps other people. So I'd absolutely encourage you to do that both at the local level and at the national or international or regional level. Be a thought leader. It's so easy now to make your own UX blog. You can do that with any number of tools, but you can also do that directly on LinkedIn. And put out your thoughts. Put out your long form thoughts in your blog, but also put out your shorter thoughts, and you can just do that very quickly, directly via social media, particularly with things like Twitter. But again, you're establishing your credibility as a UX thought leader. And finally, I want to say that serendipity happens. Serendipity, we think of it kind of this magical thing where, oh yeah, a good job just got offered to me, a good thing just happened. In fact, though, the way that serendipity happens is that it's the collection of things that you set in motion through the leadership, through the storytelling, through through social media, through online, and so on. And when you set so many things in motion, something is going to bear fruit. So it's really all about doing this now, doing this today. Like I say, whether or not you're looking for a job, and good things will happen. And with that, I'll also see, what are next steps. Certainly, if you're interested in the book, this is the table of contents. We have, establishing your foundation. We have getting a job and things that we've talked about here for recruiters, employers, and also kind of what job seekers should know. And then career glimpses, which is part 4, which is, the detailed breakdown on all the different things that go into the UX umbrella that we talked about. And by the way, I found, if you go to the crcpress.com website, depending on what country you're in, the country selector, which adjusts everything that needs to be adjusted, is a little hard to find at the very, very tippy top center, particularly if you scroll down a couple pixels. But it is there, and all the Amazon, all the various Amazon country-specific Amazon sites seem to have the book, as far as I can tell. And if you're interested in kind of a more extended version of this conversation that we had today, if you go to lynda.com, if you have access to that, and many people have access through work or through a public institution or like a library, you can find the extended conversation about planning a career in user experience. I will also say that there are 2 new Lynda courses that will be coming hopefully sometime soon, that have already been filmed. I'm just waiting for them to go live, both about being a freelancer, which is another very interesting conversation, and one that I enjoy myself. So that all said, that's all I have to say. So please feel free to connect with me on Twitter and on LinkedIn, and the UX Careers Handbook has a Facebook page, which you can feel free to like, and that's it. So yeah, so questions.
Thank you so much, Cory. I just posted a link in the chat window. UXPA members actually get a discount on Cory's book. So, and you can check out, we have other member discounts as well. But of course, if you're interested in this book, that's a great reason to become a member, because then you can get a discount on the book. So thank you, Cory. This was really, really valuable. I think a lot of people, we have a couple questions. People really enjoyed this. I think it was really valuable for people who are currently looking for a new job, a new career, as well as, like you said, staying fresh. And, in the future, you might be looking for a career because until retirement do us part. I love that. Okay, so we have a couple questions. We have a few questions around portfolio. So let's see. The first one is around, so this, Carrie says, I'm part of design and UX communities, and it appears that some of the portfolios, work, etc., follow a certain appearance. Why are these generic websites and branding so common, and how are these people getting jobs at top companies if their work is a bit generic? And you might not be able to answer those precise questions, but can you say anything about this, about how these portfolios and websites, personal branding seem to be pretty generic, and any advice around that?
Sure. So, I mean, what I would say is there's two ways that it can be generic. One way is the interface. So someone might use a portfolio interface that says, "Hey, pop your documents in here, write your little narrative here, and go for it." The other is with the items themselves. So with the interface, if they're generic, then that may or may not be a problem. If the employer, if it's a visual design position, very focused on the artistry and the kind of creativity, then having a generic portfolio, a framework for that portfolio may be a problem. If, however, we're talking about, say, a user researcher who, who isn't expected to be creative, then that might be fine, and really what matters is the deliverables. Now, the deliverables themselves, be it for interaction design or visual design or user research or something else, are going to be I guess basically need to tell a specific story. Now, if those deliverables are generic, like, oh, here's my wireframes and they look like any other wireframe, that may be okay, maybe not okay, as long as it depends on what the story is, such that what the story is, such that the employer is going to be looking. And if it's appropriate, and the employer says, hey, you know what, this is what I want. Your story matches, your deliverables look generic, but that's really what I want. That's okay. It really just depends on that alignment between employer and potential employee.
Do you have recommendations around portfolios? Like, is it absolutely necessary? How important is one? Oftentimes, researchers think they don't have anything for a portfolio like designers have. So, like, what do you recommend for researchers for their portfolio?
Okay, so even though I don't look for a job, I am often meeting with clients, and they say, "Hey, can we see some deliverables?" So, as a researcher, the kinds of deliverables I would show them are types of reports. So, for example, sometimes a client will say to me, "Hey, I want a Word report." Sometimes they say, "Hey, I want a PowerPoint report." Sometimes they'll say, "Hey, I want 2 slides." Sometimes they'll say, I just want a couple bullets in an email. And I'll often kind of display different kinds of reports because this in turn kind of says, this is what I can produce for you. Similarly, sometimes they'll say, hey, I really wish, I really want some video clips, or I want to see some illustration of what happens during the sessions. Sometimes they'll want the deliverables like a test plan. Sometimes they'll want a deliverable like a screener, and I have these at the ready. Now, my technique actually, which different things work for different people. Some things are very sensitive and I can't show them, so those just never end up in my deliverables. My personal technique is that I will say, okay, what do you, the potential client, want? And then I'll say, let's do either a shared screen or an in-person meeting, where I'll kind of skim through the ones that are less sensitive, where it's okay for me to show them, or else anonymize some stuff, as long as that's okay. And I don't have a portfolio where I just say, hey, go over here and check it out. Here's the login and password, and go for it. So that is my technique. It works for me. I mean, obviously, everything is different. Everyone has different situations, different approaches. But certainly, if for a researcher, putting various deliverables in a password protected site, assuming that that's okay with those deliverables and what they are, and there's nothing too confidential, that is justifiable for those items. And if in fact everything is super confidential, and they've only been at this one job with great stuff but super confidential, at least tell the narrative of what you did. So you can tell the story without the deliverable items, if that's in fact the if that's in fact the best that that you can do. But be prepared for someone to say, hey, I really need to see those items. Then you either have to kind of deal with it, or say, I just really can't. But but let me tell you more about the story, and paint that story in a colorful way.
Yeah, and I would agree with you on that, Cory. I think, I've done this in the past where I've showed redacted presentations where I've removed any identifying information. You can also show them in person, so you're not sending any of these, private reports electronically, but you can actually show them, during an interview or a follow-up to an interview or something like that, because you definitely want to showcase your skills. And like you mentioned in your presentation, you would definitely want to say what you did, what your contribution was to any project. You don't just want to say, worked on such and such project. It's like, worked on such and such project, and this was my role, this was my contribution, this is why it was important for me to be on that project, and this was the outcome, this is how it was impactful.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
All right, we have a bunch of questions about transitioning into the UX field. So let me start with this one here. So I'm looking to transition from project to program management into the UX field, someone who is currently completing a master's in UX design. I'm not a visual designer for sure, but where might be the best area for my experience and background?
Well, so actually, with project management or program management, I mean, essentially, a typical role of a project or program manager would be to manage UXers. So that said, if you want to be a UX leader, managing UX teams, in some ways that might be the most natural transition. But that said, you still would, if you say now I'm a UX lead, in a way that you're managing and not being a practitioner per se, then then you also have to kind of fully understand, in a way that probably much more so than you would as a project manager, how to do UX. But that said, also, really, if you want to be a practitioner and you say, well, I'd rather be a practitioner than a manager of UXers, then you really anywhere is fair game. I mean, you're talking about kind of different elements. One is a leadership element, and one is a management and structuring element, and the other is more of a practitioner element. And if you say, well, I don't really have those artistic visual design skills, and if I want to be a designer, then interaction design may be where the right place to be is. But it all depends. I mean, there's no kind of natural connection between being a project manager or program manager and a specific kind of UX, per se.
Okay. Similarly, do I need to get a formal master's in UX or take a certification in UX to make a transition to this field?
No. No, you don't. Really, I mean, having a undergraduate degree, a bachelor's degree, or of any kind is certainly a good thing, and probably often someone could get closed out of jobs simply for not having a degree. But that said, UXers really come from all sorts of different degrees and backgrounds, because it's not always determined. I mean, someone doesn't know they want to do UX until after they graduate from their undergraduate studies. So by all means, you don't need that. That said, there are certainly times when a master's degree is very valuable, and that's going to be job specific. A job will say, hey, you know what, we just want someone with a master's degree. I'd say the higher education, my impression is, often comes with more of something like a UX researcher than, say, an interaction designer. But that said, even with an interaction designer saying, hey, I've got this design-oriented this design-oriented master's degree is certainly a valuable thing, and would never be a negative. Occasionally a PhD is at certain, and it's very employer specific. At certain employers for certain UX kinds of jobs, a PhD is extra valuable. But it's very, very specific to certain employers and certain job types. Again, I'd say user research is one probably the most inclined to have an employer say, yeah, PhD is a good thing. But either way, really, wherever you are, you probably don't have to go back to school. But that said, if it's easy and you're at a point where you enjoy school, you're an undergraduate program right now, or you're considering graduate school, by all means, it can only be a good thing.
And what do you think about certificates?
Okay, so a certificate is fine, but really it's about the learning. Don't feel like, oh, I've got this certificate, or even worse, I've got this certification. It's not. No one's going to see a certification and say, oh, you've got certification, that's valuable. The ones that see the most value in that are the ones, I think, that often aren't really embedded in UX and say, okay, it was certification, we want certification, that's good. By and large, a certificate is only as good as the learning that went with it. And again, a certification is only as good as the learning that went with it. There's no harm in it, but it's not providing you something like, say, in project management, a PMP, for whatever reason, is often required for project management jobs, at least here in the United States. And that's just not true with user experience.
Great, and I just wanted to let you all know that I stuck a couple links in the chat window. One of them was a salary survey that UXPA conducts. We conduct it every 2 years, and we just released the findings from the 2016 UX salary survey. So you can check that out to see how things like degrees and where you live and title and things like that play a role in salaries. All right, a couple more questions here, following right along these lines here. So here is someone who's trying to acquire some base skills for user experience research and IXD type positions before graduating. This is currently a undergrad. What do you think are the base skills for these subfields, UX research and IXD?
Well, I think the basest of base field or base skills is the understanding of the user. I mean, it's not even necessarily a specific skill as much as, well, it is a specific skill, but it's really understanding, I'm here to help the user. This is who the user is. This is how we understand who the user is, through research, through design, through iteration. That's really I think the most core thing to understand, the foundation, before going any further. Within research, it's all elements of the research process, and you're really kind of understanding at a high level. This is how I develop my materials appropriately in an unbiased fashion. This is how I will moderate my research, or will conduct my research with users. And this is how I will understand the findings, and this is the kind of thing that I will produce. For interaction design, it's this is how I first understand the user needs and the corporate needs. This is the kinds of things and the tools I can use to produce these certain kinds of deliverables, be it a sketch or a wireframe or something simple to sketch out. And then this is how this feeds into the user research process, so I can make sure that it's appropriate.
Okay, last question. Do you think it's good to specialize in a particular industry as a UX researcher? And along those same lines, is it better to have a specialty research method, or better to be kind of a jack of all trades?
Within research, I think being a researcher probably argues, at least to some extent, for being a jack of all trades. I mean, that said, I do much more usability testing than I do focus groups, because it generally makes more sense with the particular projects I do, or I do much more usability testing than I do ethnography. But that said, I have enough skills in any one of those areas to be able to do a study when needed because someone's going to look for me as a user researcher. But you know, thinking about hold on, I just forgot the other half of the question. Sorry, what was that, Jen?
Jack of all trades or particular. Oh, and do you think it's good to specialize in a particular industry
Oh,
as a
yeah,
UX
industry
researcher?
level, right? Sorry about that. Yeah, so the with respect to the industry, I personally prefer to be industry agnostic and basically bounce between industries as a consultant because I enjoy that the most. I enjoy having kind of these differing experiences. I don't think there's any negative impact to it because, again, largely the methods are the same. That said, you know, there's certainly something to be said for saying, you know, I'm an expert in user research in the insurance industry, and then you start to know certain insurance jargon and you know, certain very specific situations, which you may not get otherwise. So you know, it's not a route that I personally would enjoy, but certainly, you know, I think it's a fair argument to be made for that.
Great. Thank you so much, Cory. We are out of time. And just to remind you all, check out uxpa.org for lots of information, including, you know, if you become a member, you can get a discount on Cory's book. I gave you a couple links there for that, as well as a volunteering link and then the UX salary survey link. Also, stay tuned on our website for upcoming webinars. And feel free to reach out to Cory offline if you have more questions. He is a great resource regarding UX careers and all things UX. Oh, and this will be on our website shortly, so you'll be able to access this presentation again if you want to share it with colleagues or if you would like to watch it again. So thank you so much, Cory. That was really, really great. I appreciate you chatting with us today.
Thanks,
Have a great
Jen.
day, everybody.
Great to be
Thanks.
here.
Bye.